I got to tell you something. I just, we're talking about other stuff, but this struck me yesterday. If you had told me 20 years ago that all of those organizations would have their credibility gone effectively, I would have said you're crazy. These are the foundations of American democracy. And legacy media in the United States, almost without exception, and we haven't talked about the very mixed bag that the New York Times is, where they have some great reporting, but they also have some editors who do crazy stuff. Um, uh, it's just not what it was. I mean, maybe you and I are just, altacockers sitting on a park bench saying, remember when, but remember when these organizations were the backbone of our democracy?
So it's true that we are altacockers sitting on a park bench saying, remember when? But that doesn't mean it's not deeply troubling and unique in our lifetimes. And you're absolutely right. I did not think that we would see the craven behavior of our mainstream press continue. I thought, at least after Trump showed more vividly than before the evilness of what's going on, the headlong rush to full blown autocracy, to a police state, that we would get some pushback. And you're right, the New York Times and the Washington Post still have some absolutely terrific reporters. And they have many stories that are absolutely terrific. But it's also the case, especially for the Times, that there are editors who write the headlines, which is what most people read if they see it at all, that soft pedal, downplay, and excuse outrageous and illegal behavior. And then we'll run stories. This is not about Trump, but I must say, this story about Mamdani's college application, where facing a set of choices about his background, which were a little bit confusing because his father's family was from Africa and he was born there, even though it was a South Asian heritage, put down in his college application for Columbia that he was both Asian and African, and wrote that was because of that heritage. And they made a big deal out of this and then wrote an explanation that was ridiculous. And what that showed me, and especially the explanation, and this is something pointed out vividly over and over again by the former public editor, Margaret Sullivan, who continues to do great work, that there's no learning curve there. It's not as if, having seen everything that's happened, confronting their own culpability in where we are today, that they're rethinking the way they do things. They're not. And you have the cowards or the greedy ones like Paramount and CBS, Disney and ABC, paying protection money in effect. But then you have the craven ones who just won't do much of anything. And let's start with the White House press corps, which is just an ongoing complete embarrassment, sitting there while the press secretary or the president tell blatant lies. I mean, actually just say watch the president say incredibly stupid things and don't respond at all. Yesterday, Trump said again, multiple lies. There are states with $1.99 gasoline. There are no states with $1.99 gasoline. He said there are two states. Did we have a reporter who even would ask, Mr. President, which two states were they? They said nothing. He sat around the table with the president of Liberia, a country formed from the United States, whose official language is English. And as the president of Liberia spoke, he said, "You speak really good English. Where did you learn that?" They don't say a thing, they don't do a thing. We get books about Joe Biden and then, round the clock treatment of that on CNN. And Trump, whose mental deterioration and utter stupidity are on display minute by minute, day by day, we get shrugs.
Yeah, no, no, it's true. I was thinking about this today. I don't know if you recall this, but back in the olden days, during the Clinton administration, I was a senior trade official. And so I ran the International Trade Administration. I was involved in all sorts of trade stuff. And while it was never the great passion of my life, because I did that, I paid some attention. And I know a lot of trade people. And I was watching Trump's trade policies. We passed 90 days without 90 deals. And in fact, of the deals that he said were deals, they weren't even really deals. There were just a handful. And one was a band aid with China, and one was a framework with the UK. And there was a slightly more advanced framework with Vietnam. But even that says in its
Not a
language that
deal.
it's a framework. So there are no deals in 90 days. And a lot of these things were illegal, and a lot of these things will achieve nothing. And he's on again, he's off again. It's completely erratic, deadlines, everything else. And it struck me that his trade policy is insane. It's not, we're not having a debate like should this be the case or not the case. We have gone from having very low tariffs to having, I think, at the moment, an average of almost 16% tariffs across the board, which is something like 6 times or 8 times higher than anybody else, for no reason, achieving nothing. Um, uh, and it's insane. But I don't pick up the paper and see anybody going, "This is lunacy." It's like having a drunk driving a school bus full of little kids. It's insane. He is destroying our economy. He's destroying the global trading system. He's destroying our credibility. He's pushing up prices. Um, and everybody's like, yes, well, he's put a 30-day extension on the whatever, to no end, with no strategy, with nothing to show for it. And you would think that, the press would cover that, but they don't seem to.
No, and he said yesterday again, August 1st was always the deadline, which was another lie. And of course, he says over and over, we're going to bring in trillions from foreign countries who are bilking us. But at the same time, we're going to cut these wonderful deals so that we don't have to do the tariffs, which means no revenue coming in. And of course, keeps repeating the nonsense that Americans won't pay for tariffs and no pushback, nothing. And this latest nonsense with Brazil, which was done only to punish them from protecting their own country from the dictator Bolsonaro, who tried to, just like Trump, stage a coup after he lost an election, to putting tariffs on countries. Okay, let's take Korea. We have a signed free trade agreement with Korea. We don't have tariffs with Korea. He sends Korea the same form letter, poorly drafted. It could have been done by a third grader, threatening tariffs for a country that doesn't pay them. And this doesn't get any coverage whatsoever. And you're right. It's not just about the insanity of his views. I keep saying, and we've said on this podcast, if Wharton doesn't rescind his degree, they ought to lose their accreditation if this is the kind of economics they're teaching. Uh, you know, the damage to the economy is overwhelming. And of course, then I've watched some of these interviews with Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, with, I will continue to call him Howard Nutlick, the Commerce Secretary. But Scott Bessent saying there has not been a president in 100 years as literate about economics as Donald Trump. And you think if there were a toady Olympics, Scott Bessent has just moved into the lead for the gold medal, repeating absolute nonsense. No one says anything. He trots out Kevin Hassett, my former colleague, who at one point, at least, you would have considered a serious economist, to spout utter nonsense on various television interviews, and there's no pushback. It's, we're going to get nothing till the economy craters.
Uh, yeah, no, there's no question about that. And we may get nothing then because nobody
Yeah.
seems to want to stand up to him. At what point do people realize he's not running again and he doesn't really have any political power? I mean, isn't that true? Like, I don't understand
Well,
why everybody's living in fear of this guy.
let's give the caveat first that we may not have another presidential election. Um, we're facing a very credible threat of suspension of laws, rules, the Constitution, and martial law on his part. Um, the second is that they're afraid of him because they're afraid that he will unleash physical violence against those who cross him. And even though most of the politicians understand, Republican politicians, there are complete nutcases, there's no doubt. A very large share of them know full well that they're dealing with a narcissistic, sociopathic lunatic here who is deteriorating. But as long as the Republican Party and its adherents and their voters are behind him, you're going to find it very rare for somebody to challenge him in any fashion.
What happens, when let's assume for a moment that he actually doesn't stay.
Yeah, please let's assume it.
Who's up next? Yeah, well, no, I think it's going to be hard for them to control the midterms enough to stay in, and I think for a variety of reasons, not the least of which he seems to be losing his marbles. Um, he doesn't stay. Is assuming that's the case. Who's up next?
So,
Who's in the
we
on
have to
deck
offer,
circle for the
yeah,
Republican Party?
we have to offer the giant caveat here that if everything falls apart, as it probably will, um, we may see the usual suspects not emerging in any fashion. But there are two out there who, right now, would be the two obvious uh, possibilities, chilling as it is: J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio. And those are the ones mentioned more often. Rubio having completely sold his soul to the devil, having become, in effect, a mass murderer, responsible with his actions or inactions at this point for more than 300,000 unnecessary deaths, blowing up the State Department and doing many other horrific things, standing by while Russia romps. Um, but all of that is to put himself in a position where he could be an heir to Donald Trump. And I think he probably believes, partly because he has more experience in this vein, running circles around the politically challenged J.D. Vance. But there might be some other younger nutcases who could emerge as well. It may be that these two will still be considered establishment figures, even if it's the Trump establishment. Or maybe you get a Donald Trump Jr. running uh, to be the heir to his father. Um, all of it looks absolutely pathetic. But that's where we are as of today.